It is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Stu Myers. I actually had the unique opportunity to work with Stu on a very touching memorial for his close friend and colleague Franco Modigliani several years ago now. And Stu has literally written the book on corporate finance, and some of his more recent research has focused on corporate governance. And he will share with us today a session on the future of corporate governance. Please join me in welcoming Stu Myers.
Well, welcome. Our two panelists are Bill Pounds and Adam Emmerich. I'm going to introduce them in more detail in a moment, but perhaps I could introduce the session first. So you've noticed the emphasis on future, right? This is not a session about the scandals of the past boom and bust. It's not about Enron. It's not about WorldCom. It's not about Parmalat. It's not about your favorite train crash, corporate train crash. We want to look to the future. Enron or Parmalat or whatever may come up, but I hope they only come up if they illuminate the future of corporate governance in some way. I've actually come to the realization that the word Enron is like a Rorschach test. You remember what Rorschach tests are? You have the psychologist and a patient, and the psychologist takes a piece of absorbent paper, drips some ink on it, folds it up, opens it out, shows it to the patient, and asks the patient, "What do you think?" And the correct answer, of course, is, "Doctor, it's just some random spilled ink." But somehow showing that random spilled ink to patients is supposed to trigger them to talk, and by talking, they reveal what's in the back of their brains. Now, if you mention Enron, it's sort of the same thing. People start talking, but you learn more about the person talking than you do about Enron or about corporate governance generally. And that's my way of saying that we're going to try to look forward at the future of corporate governance, and also we're going to try to think about corporate governance generally rather than specifically. It's too easy to get wrapped up in lists of laws and regulations and procedures and who's liable for what. If you think about it more broadly, take the point of view of the economy as a whole and the efficiency of the U.S. economy. Corporate governance, I would define as organizing and managing the relationship between outside financial investors and the managers and employees who actually run the firm. So anything that affects that relationship between financial capital and the people who actually get the job done inside the firm comes, in my definition, under the rubric of corporate governance. So the people who run the firm have to decide how much capital to raise, how to raise it, crucially, how to invest it, and then once the investment and the assets are there, how to run the whole firm as efficiently as possible. We want the people who run the firm to make the financing and investment and operation decisions so that the firm as a whole is efficient, competitive internationally, and delivers as much value for the people involved in the firm, and not necessarily only for the stockholders. I'm trying to tackle this big problem of corporate governance in my own research, and I can tell you that it isn't easy. Once you get beyond the discussions about laws and regulations and procedures and who's liable for what, and ask what system of corporate governance would be efficient, most efficient, and what could we do to make our existing corporate governance more efficient for the economy as a whole, that's a very deep and big problem. I find it a lot easier to say what good corporate governance is not than what it is. But it's also obvious immediately, when you think about it, that there's no single optimum system of corporate governance. There's no system of corporate governance that would solve every problem for every company in every circumstance. You have to think, I like to think of multiple systems of corporate governance. A good example would be the private equity market in the United States, which is booming and growing very, very rapidly. Private equity means private ownership of corporations. You could think of the private equity market as a competing system of corporate governance. What's it competing with? Well, it's competing with public companies who have to operate under different rules because they are public. Okay, I may give some examples later, but right now, I'm going to introduce our two panelists who know more about corporate governance than I do. I'll introduce them both. Then Bill will speak, Bill Pounds will speak, and then Adam. I may not be able to resist following up if their thoughts trigger some of mine, but we'll try to save a good chunk of this session for questions from the floor. First, many of you know Bill Pounds. He is the former dean of Sloan. He was my first boss when I arrived here as a Callow assistant professor. And after retiring as dean at an early age, he spent 10 years as a senior advisor to the Rockefeller family. He served on many boards, including the Putnam Funds, General Mills, most recently the Museum of Fine Arts, where many of us were last night. And at the same time, he's continued to teach at Sloan. He actually teaches management, by the way. I teach financial management, and Gabe Bertrand teaches operations management. Most of the people who teach at Sloan teach management with an adjective first, like financial or operational. Bill Pounds teaches management with no adjectives. Adam Emmerich is a partner at Wachtell Lipton, Rosen and Katz in New York. He went to Swarthmore College. He's a graduate of the University of Chicago Law School. And although I've just today had the opportunity to meet him for the first time, I know that he is recognized as one of the world's leading lawyers on mergers and acquisitions and corporate governance. So we've got two experienced, thoughtful, articulate observers of corporate governance and practice, and I'm going to invite them to take the floor. Bill is going to start.
Okay. Thank you. What is this? What is this? I'm 2 generations behind. I not only do not use PowerPoint, I don't even use overhead projectors. I miss the blackboard and the chalk. Stu said that I teach about management. Actually, Stu, I used to teach.